Hello, everyone. Tonight we will be not rushing, not scrolling, not pretending everything is fine. Tonight, we are standing in a room that smells faintly of lemon polish and something softer, like old roses left too long in a vase. The lamps are on, but the light feels distant. The air is still, and if you listen closely, you can hear the hum of silence sitting between the walls. There's a teacup, half full, long cold. There's a photograph, tilted slightly on the mantel. A man in uniform, a woman in pearls, both of them frozen in time, smiling at a future that never quite turned out the way they thought it would. And beside that photo, there's a letter, still sealed, still heavy, still waiting to be read. This isn't just a story, it's a memory. And like all memories, it starts quiet and ends somewhere you didn't expect. Because I was just the housewife. That's what they called me. Said I made casseroles, packed lunches, said I didn't understand the real world. They were wrong, but they didn't find out until it was too late. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And while we're here together, tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what time it is right now where you are. I read every comment, I really do. Now, turn off the lights. Maybe turn on the fan for a little soft white noise. And let's begin. I stood on the porch with a suitcase that felt heavier than the grief still sitting on my chest. The front door had just closed, not gently, not kindly, but with that solid, echoing slam, like the end of something permanent. Behind it, my daughter-in-law's voice, sharp as glass. Behind it, the home I had cooked in, scrubbed down, prayed inside. Behind it, the only life I had ever known. I was 66 years old, and apparently, now, homeless. 2 weeks ago, I was a wife, a caretaker, a quiet presence moving through the rooms without fuss. Harold would be in his recliner. I'd bring him tea. He'd ask me what was for dinner, and I'd smile, because I always had an answer. Now, Harold was gone. The recliner sat empty, and the people who shared my blood, well, they had other plans. They told me I had 48 hours to leave, not in private, not with compassion, but out there, on the lawn, in front of neighbors, in front of my grandson. I remember the sound of plastic bags hitting concrete, the way my photo albums bounced and bent, the way Susan, my daughter-in-law, stood with her arms crossed, saying, "It's not personal, Bessie. It's just business." It was always business when it came to her. The house, she said, was too big, too expensive, too filled with things that didn't matter anymore. She was already on the phone with a realtor. She wanted to downsize, find a condo with a pool. She said the kids needed a fresh start, a new space. But I was the one being erased. I asked if I could stay until the weekend, just a few more nights. She shook her head like I was being unreasonable, like I was asking for the moon. Harold Jr., my son, didn't say much. He never did when Susan was speaking. Just stared at the ground like there might be some kind of escape buried under the grass. There wasn't. That night, I sat on the curb with my purse in my lap and 100 questions spinning in my mind. Where do you go when everything you've ever called home is no longer yours? What do you pack when the people who should love you don't even make space for you in the guest room? I checked into a cheap motel 3 miles away. Room 108. It smelled like bleach and cigarettes. And as I lay on the stiff bed, staring at the popcorn ceiling, I thought, maybe this is how I disappear, not with a bang, but with a key card that barely works and a window that doesn't open. But I wasn't gone yet, not entirely. The next morning, the sun came in sharp. No curtains in that motel room, just the kind of light that doesn't care if you've slept. I pulled myself up, feet to the cold floor, and reached for the one thing I still had left, my handbag. I unzipped it slowly, like I might somehow find more than what was really inside. Some magic, some answer. But it was just receipts, tissues, and a laminated photo of Harold and me at Coney Island, 1974. Then my fingers brushed something hard. Metal. Old. A small, worn key. Not house keys, not car keys. A key to something older, something I hadn't seen in decades. My heart stuttered, because I remembered. Back in 1983, I had walked into the First National Bank with my coat zipped all the way up and my hair still wet from the rain. I'd opened a safety deposit box under the name B. Morrison. Harold never asked what the B stood for. He just assumed it was something to do with bills or baking or Bessie being sentimental. But it wasn't. That key sat quietly in the bottom of my purse for 40 years. Even after we moved. Even after I stopped working. Even after everyone in the family called me the soft one, the nice one, the housewife. But that key, that little piece of metal, was my spine. And that morning, with nothing but my suitcase and $270 in my checking account, I knew what I had to do. I dressed slowly, carefully, like I used to for church, and I walked 2 miles to the bank, the same one where I'd first opened the box all those years ago. It had been renovated since then. The brick was cleaner. The teller wore AirPods. But the vault was still there. When the manager asked for my ID, my voice almost shook, but I said my name clearly. "Mrs. B. Morrison, I have a key." She looked surprised. They always are. Like older women, only come in to complain about overdraft fees or ask about grandchildren. She guided me into a small, windowless room, and I stood there as she turned the key. And the second it clicked, I swear, I felt something inside me shift, like all the parts of myself I'd hidden were waking up. Inside the box, folders, receipts, a flash drive, and a single envelope with my handwriting on the front. It read, "In case I forget who I really am." My hands were trembling, but I opened it, and what I found inside was the beginning of everything they never knew about me. I took everything back to the motel, the folders, the envelope, the flash drive. I laid them out across the stiff motel bed, like puzzle pieces from a life I hadn't touched in decades, and then I sat there, still, silent, because I knew what I was looking at, but part of me still didn't believe it. In the first folder, there were old bank ledgers, all handwritten, each page filled with deposits, withdrawals, little notes in the margins. Inventory job Saturdays, plus $60 a week. Mrs. Patterson's bookkeeping, plus $100 a month, envelope from hardware store cashed quietly. Each one was a breadcrumb. Every single dollar I'd tucked away while no one was watching. While Harold thought I was at sewing class. While Susan laughed about my recipe collection. But it wasn't just the money. It was the discipline, the planning, the way I'd learned to stretch $10 until it looked like 50. I flipped through more folders. Deeds, titles, investment forms from companies I barely remembered buying into. Some small, some now worth more than I ever imagined. One sheet had a post-it on it. It read, "Keep this one for Lisa's future." Lisa, my granddaughter, the same girl who set my photo albums out by the trash. I closed my eyes for a second, let the ache settle. Then I opened the flash drive. It was a spreadsheet, tidy, color-coded. It tracked everything I'd built, rental income, stock growth, private investments, assets, liquid and otherwise. I clicked through, heart racing, and when I saw the total at the bottom of the file, I didn't breathe for a full 10 seconds. $6,231,000. My hand went to my chest. Not because I didn't know it was there, but because it had never been real until now. All those quiet years. All the times I let Harold sign the tax returns, let the kids talk over me at dinner, let Susan smirk when I said I didn't understand today's economy. I had smiled, served dessert, stayed quiet, and yet I had built an empire behind their backs, not out of spite, but out of survival, out of instinct, because long before Harold got that first promotion, I knew better than to trust a paycheck, or promises. And now, with nothing but a dingy motel room and a blinking lamp beside me, I was sitting on top of a fortune, not his, mine. The house they kicked me out of? I could buy 10 of them, but I didn't want 10. I wanted one, just one. The one with the red brick chimney and the creaky stairs, and the kitchen where I had baked every birthday cake for 38 years. The one they told me no longer belonged to me. That's when I decided I was going to take it back. Quietly, legally, and without warning. The next morning, I walked into the real estate office wearing my best cardigan and a pair of shoes that still held the shape of church pews. The receptionist gave me a once-over. Not rude, exactly. Just the way people look at someone who smells like lavender and memory. She asked if I had an appointment. No, I said softly, but I'd like to speak with someone about purchasing a home. She blinked. Which one? I gave her the address. My address. Her eyebrows lifted, just for a second. Then she nodded and typed something quickly into the computer. Janet will be right with you. Janet. Mid-30s, tight bun, sharp smile. She came out holding a manila folder and a tablet, already in sales mode. Interested in that property, are you? She didn't recognize me. Why would she? To her, I was just another older woman, with a polite voice and a handbag full of tissues and old mints. She had no idea that I had wiped every baseboard in that house 1,000 times over. No idea that I could still hear Harold's snores in the upstairs bedroom or the creak in the second stair from the bottom. Yes, I replied. I'd like to make an offer, but I'd prefer not to go through financing. Her eyes flicked up, just briefly, and then she smiled again, tighter this time. Of course, we love cash buyers. She started flipping through the property details, talking about square footage and upgrades Susan had made. Cheap bathroom tile, mismatched curtains in the kitchen. She said the seller was eager to move quickly, that she'd already reduced the price twice. I nodded. Then I pulled out the folder with my offer. It was $50,000 over asking, no contingencies, no inspections, just a clean, easy sale. Janet stopped mid-sentence. May I ask, why this house? Sentimental reasons? I smiled. Yes, you could say that. She asked for my full name for the documents. I gave it to her slowly, deliberately. Beatrice Morrison. Still, no spark of recognition. It didn't matter. We finalized the paperwork in 30 minutes. She said the seller would be thrilled. I said I hoped so. As I walked out, the automatic doors whooshed open behind me, and I felt the sunlight hit my face. It was warm, familiar, like the warmth from an oven you once trusted. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want drama. I didn't even want an apology. I wanted my house, and I was getting it back. Not by begging, not by yelling, not by trying to remind anyone who I had been. I would remind them by what I could do. And what I could do was buy the ground right back out from under them. 3 days later, Susan stood in her kitchen, my kitchen, holding a mug of overpriced coffee and telling her friend on the phone that she'd finally found a buyer. A miracle, she said, laughing like the world had bent just for her. 50 grand over asking, all cash, no inspection. It's like the universe just knew I deserved a break. I wasn't there, but I could imagine it. Because that's how she always talked. Like things happened to her because she was special, not because someone else had been quietly, patiently building the future she was busy trying to sell. I didn't gloat, didn't even flinch when Janet called and said the offer had been accepted. The closing date was set. All that was left was signatures. Susan never asked who the buyer was. She didn't care. All she wanted was her check, a fresh start, a condo with a pool. The house she was selling? She didn't even bother to say goodbye to it. Just packed her things into boxes. The cheap wine glasses I'd bought from the discount store, the dishes from our wedding set, even the curtain rods Harold had installed the day after he retired. She took everything she thought mattered, but the bones of the house stayed behind. And so did I. I waited until the deal was done, until the funds were wired, until the keys were mine again. And then, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, I parked across the street. Not in the driveway. Not yet. The house looked smaller than I remembered. But that's how things go when you've been forced to see them from the outside. The new locks clicked easily. The air inside smelled different. Faint lavender spray, new paint in the hallway. But underneath that, still my cinnamon drawer. Still my tea kettle, dented and loyal. I walked through every room slowly, touched the walls, ran my fingers along the railing I'd polished for decades, and when I reached the bedroom, I didn't cry. I just stood there, quietly, as if waiting for Harold's soft snore to greet me again. But there was only silence. And yet, it wasn't empty, because I was there, not as a guest, not as a burden, not as someone tolerated out of pity. I was home. I left the curtains open that night, let the moonlight in, sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and my envelope of documents beside me. Tomorrow, I would go to the lawyer's office. I'd let them see, not to prove a point, but to remind them that I was never just the housewife. I was the foundation they all stood on. And now, I was the one holding the deed. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was anxious, but because I was remembering. The house creaked the way it always had, like it was stretching, like it was saying, "Thank you for coming home." And as I sat there, under the dim kitchen light, tea cooling in my hands, memories began to walk through the room. One by one. Harold coming home late from night school, dropping his books on the counter and kissing me on the cheek. Me, handing him a plate I kept warm in the oven. Never saying how tired I was. Just smiling. Then came the mornings, packing lunches, fixing collars, Harold Jr. with jelly on his chin and a backpack full of dreams. But what no one saw, what no one ever noticed, was how I worked. After they left for the day, I went out. Bookkeeping at the local seamstress shop, Saturdays in the back office of the hardware store, inventory nights, envelope jobs paid in cash. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't loud, but it was mine. And I kept it quiet, because I knew what would happen if I didn't. Harold was a good man, but he had pride, the kind that made him uncomfortable with a woman who made more than him. So I let him believe he carried us, and in some ways, he did. But I carried us too, just in different hands. When we almost lost the house in '87, I was the one who paid the mortgage, from an account no one knew about, under a name that wasn't quite mine. But close enough. When Harold Jr. needed college money, it was my rental income that covered the gaps. He thought it came from a family savings bond. I let him believe that, because being believed wasn't as important as keeping them safe. I invested in what I understood. Small places, people I trusted, things I could touch and manage and measure. I bought one duplex, then another. I rented to single mothers, older couples, people who just needed a fair landlord. And when the money started growing, I didn't change my lifestyle. I changed my future. Year after year, I paid taxes, kept records, filed away every receipt, every proof of who I was. In that box, no one thought to open. And still, they laughed when I didn't know how to use the smart TV, rolled their eyes when I offered to cook dinner instead of ordering out, called me sweet, old-fashioned, just the housewife. But I had built something they couldn't even begin to understand. And now, they were about to find out. Not with a speech, not with shouting, with numbers and silence. Two things that had always been mine. Friday morning, warm, overcast. The kind of morning where the sky feels too full, like it's holding its breath. I wore navy, pressed, neat. The same dress I'd worn to Harold's retirement party 15 years ago. He said I looked like a senator's wife that night. Today, I wanted to look like someone who still owned her own name. The law office was on the third floor of a building I used to walk past on my way to the library. Back then, I never imagined I'd have a reason to walk in. But this time, I walked in like I belonged. Janet, the realtor, was already there. Bright smile, clipboard in hand. She stood as I entered. "Mrs. Morrison, it's lovely to see you again. The seller's representative should be arriving any moment." I nodded. Calm. Steady. My hands folded over my purse like I was waiting for Sunday service to begin. 10 minutes passed. Then the door opened. Susan. She stepped in, sunglasses pushed up on her head, clipboard of her own. A little rushed, a little annoyed. When she saw me, she stopped. Blink. Frown. She looked around, confused, as if maybe she'd walked into the wrong room. Bessie? I gave her the smallest smile. Polite. Empty. Hello, Susan. She looked at Janet, then back at me. I thought this was the buyers' meeting. It is, I said, voice quiet. She blinked again, and then it hit her. Her lips parted, just slightly, like the moment between a gasp and a scream. You, she started. Yes, I said, still calm, still seated. I'm the buyer. Janet, caught in the crossfire, cleared her throat. I wasn't aware you two knew each other. Susan's voice was sharp now, tight. Why didn't you say anything? You've been staying at a motel. And yet, I replied, here I am. Janet tried to push the papers forward. Shall we begin the final transfer? Susan's hands were shaking. I noticed it when she reached for her pen. A tremble, just enough. She was rattled. Good. But not humiliated. That wasn't my aim, not yet. The signing didn't take long. Initial here, sign here, date here. The room felt heavier with every stroke of the pen. Susan was no longer in control, and she knew it. After everything, the eviction, the garbage bags, the insults masked as financial wisdom. I had bought her out. She glanced at me one last time, but there was nothing left to say, so I said it for her. Thank you for taking care of the place, I whispered. And just like that, it was mine again. Not because I fought her, but because I never needed to. Susan didn't call for 3 days. I knew she would. Pride takes time to crack, especially when it's built on the illusion of control. But on the 4th day, my phone rang. Unknown number. Of course. I answered, because I wanted to hear her voice when she realized she'd been wrong about me for longer than she'd been right. Bessie, she said, no greeting, no pleasantries, just that sharp tone she used when she was trying not to sound scared. What the hell are you trying to pull? I let the silence sit for a moment. Then, I'm not pulling anything, Susan. I heard the house was on the market. I made an offer. You accepted it. You're living in a motel. You couldn't even afford to store Harold's things. That's true, I said, at the time. Her voice rose, panicked now. Where is this money coming from? Did you take something from Harold? Did you cash out his pension? I smiled. Harold's pension was yours, Susan. You already spent it, remember? Silence. So I continued. The money I used to buy the house, it wasn't Harold's. It wasn't from a life insurance policy, or a forgotten inheritance, or some secret stash in the basement. It was mine. No, she said, flat, defensive. I would have known. There's no way you just had money. I could hear it breaking in her. The belief that she was smarter, more prepared, more powerful. I leaned back in the chair by my kitchen window, looking out at the garden I'd replanted 2 days earlier. You never thought to ask, I said gently. You never once wondered how the bills got paid when Harold lost his job in '91, or how we sent Harold Jr. to college without loans, or why there was always extra in the Christmas fund, even during lean years. She didn't speak, but I wasn't finished. I worked, quietly, saved, invested. I bought properties. I rented them. I lived modestly, and every time you told me I didn't understand money, I smiled, and let you believe that. Because I didn't need her belief. I needed my freedom. Susan finally exhaled, a frustrated, bitter sound. This isn't over, she said. I'll find a way to prove that money isn't really yours. I paused, then said, I have 40 years of documentation, Susan. Receipts, tax returns, witnesses, business partners, bankers, lawyers. And what do you have? Again, silence. She hung up. I sat there for a long time, just listening to the breeze outside the window, watching the curtains move like breath. I didn't feel triumphant, just Settled, not angry, not bitter, just seen. For the first time in a long time, they were seeing me, not the apron, not the casserole, not the gentle hands folding towels. They were seeing me, and they weren't ready. The house was quiet again. Mine now, legally, irrefutably. But I didn't rush to change anything. The paint Susan had chosen? I left it. The furniture she bought on credit? Still there. She had spent thousands trying to make the house hers. New rugs, chrome fixtures, even replaced the old chandelier I loved with something modern and cold. But none of it mattered, because beneath all that was the house I had built. With my time, with my care, with my hands. I moved through the rooms like a ghost that had finally found her skin again. In the living room, I sat on the edge of the sofa and stared at the empty space where the rocking chair had been. The one Susan sold for $10 in a garage sale. The one my mother gave me. The one I used to rock Harold Jr. in when he had night terrors and fevers. Gone now, but not erased. That's the thing about memory. It survives even when the objects don't. I walked into the guest room and found one of Susan's boxes left behind. Torn, taped carelessly. Inside were crumpled receipts, mismatched socks, and, unexpectedly, one of my old recipe books. The same one she used to mock. She'd laughed about it once, said I was playing 1950s Housewife with my little clippings and handwritten notes. But here it was, tucked between baby clothes she hadn't sorted. I turned the pages slowly. My handwriting, faded but steady. Little stars next to Harold's favorites, smudges from flour and cinnamon. I held it like it was something living. And in a way, it was. I didn't cry. Not yet. I carried it to the kitchen, placed it on the counter like an offering, a return. Later that evening, the sun cast that familiar golden stripe across the hallway. The one I used to see every fall afternoon when I'd come in from hanging laundry. I stood in that light, let it warm my face, and I whispered, "I'm still here." Not to anyone in particular, not to Harold, not even to the house, to myself. Because I needed to hear it, out loud. I was still here, after all of it, after the funeral, after the bags on the lawn, after being told to leave the only place I'd ever called home. I was still here, and for the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was reclaiming the house, my story, my name. Tomorrow, I would go to the garden center, pick out new flowers for the front porch, maybe replant the lavender. But tonight, I'd sleep in my bed, in my room, in my home, and I would not apologize for a single thing I had done to get there. The law office smelled like leather and old paper. A quiet kind of wealth, the kind that doesn't shout, just exists. I sat at the long, polished table, hands folded, papers tucked neatly into a slim black binder. Across from me, Harold Jr., Susan, and Margaret, my sister-in-law. The same table where we'd met weeks earlier to read Harold's will. The same table where Susan had leaned back smugly, waiting for numbers to fall into her lap. She thought she knew everything. She thought the estate was settled, wrapped up in a bow, done. But I had requested one more meeting. A clarification, I'd called it. Now the lawyer cleared his throat. "I understand Mrs. Morrison has brought forward new documentation." I opened the binder, took my time, set the first page in front of them. A bank statement, clean, clear, stamped. Susan leaned forward, then frowned. This isn't Harold's account." "No," I said, "it's mine." Next page, a property deed. Then another, and another, 8 in total, each one fully paid off, each one in my name. Harold Jr. rubbed his temple. Margaret's jaw tightened. Susan just stared. I kept going. Investment summaries, tax returns, rental income reports, statements going back 30 years. All of it organized, all of it legal. "Where did this come from?" Harold Jr. finally asked. "From work," I said simply. "From years of work, quiet work, unseen work." Susan scoffed. "You didn't have a job." "No," I said. I had 5. They didn't speak, so I did. I kept books for Mrs. Patterson's seamstress shop, did inventory at the hardware store, cleaned offices overnight, bought duplexes, rented them, reinvested every dollar. Margaret broke the silence. Why didn't you say anything? I looked at her, at all of them. Because none of you ever asked. It was the truth. They assumed I didn't have anything to say, so I stopped offering it. And now, they were sitting in front of the life I had quietly built, while they called me soft, outdated, invisible. Harold Jr. picked up one of the documents. His voice had lost all certainty. This portfolio alone, this is millions, I nodded. And it's all accounted for. Legally, taxed, reported. Every penny. Susan's voice was a whisper now. Why did you let me throw you out? I paused. Let the question settle in the air. Because I wanted to see who you were when you thought I had nothing. The room went still. The kind of stillness that doesn't need an echo. I stood, gathered my binder, slid the pages back into place. Thank you for your time, I said. I believe we're done here. And without another word, I walked out. Not triumphant, not angry, just full, like a chapter had finally turned its own page. I went home. My home, not theirs, not his, mine. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest in my own life. I sat in the kitchen, that same kitchen where I'd once taught Lisa to make pie crust, and let the silence fill me up like music. There was no celebration, no party, no grand announcement, just peace. And peace, when you've been dismissed for decades, feels louder than applause. That night, I lit a candle in the living room, not because I needed the light, but because I wanted to watch it flicker. There was something beautiful about how it danced in the reflection of the window, like even the fire knew what it meant to burn quietly, to keep going when no one was looking. The next day, Susan called again. Her voice was smaller this time. I don't understand, she said. You could have humiliated me, publicly. You could have taken everything. I didn't answer right away, because she wasn't wrong. I could have. But that wasn't what this was about. You never asked me who I was, I said softly. You only decided what I wasn't. She said nothing. So I continued. You thought silence meant weakness, that patience meant ignorance, that a soft voice meant a soft spine. But I was never weak. She was crying now. I could hear it in the way her breath caught, in the way her pride cracked with every word. Why didn't you stop me? She asked. Why did you let me throw you out? Because, I whispered, I needed to see if you were the kind of person I was protecting, or the kind of person I needed to protect others from. She sobbed into the phone. I'm sorry. I believed her, not because she said it, but because she finally understood what it cost her to forget I was human. Will you help me? She asked. A child's question, spoken through the voice of a woman who finally saw herself clearly. Yes, I said, but not because you deserve it, because I choose to. And that was power. Not revenge, not bitterness, but choice. Control without cruelty. That was something she had never known, and something I had lived by for decades. I hung up, placed the phone down gently, and turned to the window. The rocking chair was gone. But I still had my breath, still had my mind, still had the wealth I'd built, inside and out. And I would use it how I pleased. No explanations, no apologies, just peace and presence. The doorbell rang 2 days later. Software uncertain. Like whoever stood outside wasn't sure if they were still welcome. I opened it slowly. Lisa, my granddaughter, the one who'd carried the photo albums out to the trash without blinking. The one who used to fall asleep on my lap during thunderstorms. She stood there in a hoodie, eyes wide, hands buried in her sleeves. Hi, Grandma. I nodded. Come in. She stepped inside like the floor might still reject her, looked around, paused in the hallway. It's different, she said, then added quietly, but it still smells like you. That made something tight in my chest loosen. She followed me to the kitchen, sat down at the table, same chair she used to dangle her legs from when she was 5. "I didn't know," she said, eyes down. "Didn't know what?" She fidgeted. "The money, the properties, that you worked, that you did all that." "No one asked," I said softly. "I didn't think you had to work," she said. "We always thought you just stayed home." I sipped my tea, held her gaze. Staying home was a job, but I did more than that. I just didn't need you to see it for it to be real. She nodded slowly. Tears welled up. "I'm sorry." I didn't need her apology, but I was glad she gave it. "I want to know," she said after a long pause. "Can you tell me how you did it, what you invested in, how you knew?" I reached across the table, placed my hand on hers, and just like that, we were no longer talking about money. We were talking about legacy. I told her about the duplex, about Mrs. Patterson's shop, about tracking interest rates in the paper, about learning from watching, listening, trusting my gut. "I didn't build this to impress anyone," I said. "I built it so I'd never have to ask anyone for permission to live." Lisa nodded. "I want to be like that," I smiled. "You already are. You just don't know it yet." We sat for a while, quiet, the way only family can, when there's nothing left to perform. Before she left, she asked if she could borrow the old recipe book, said she wanted to learn how to make Harold's favorite stew. I handed it to her. No hesitation, because that was the inheritance that mattered. Not the money, not the deeds, but the knowledge, the memory, the slow and steady way of building something that lasts. The seasons began to turn. One morning, I woke up, and the sunlight had that golden tilt again, the kind that made the kitchen glow like a memory. I opened the window, breathed in, fresh soil, damp grass, a little wind. Outside, in the small garden Harold once tried to tame, I'd planted lavender again. It was coming in strong this year, thicker, wilder. Maybe it knew it belonged. That afternoon, Tommy stopped by. Tall now, shoulders hunched like he wasn't sure if he should be there. He carried a bag of tools. Said Margaret told him the front steps were loose. Said he wanted to fix them. I let him. Watched from the doorway as he crouched in the sun, working quietly. His hands just like his father's. And his grandfather's. When he was done, he stood up, wiped his hands on his jeans, and said, "Mom said you're rich now." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that what she said?" He smirked a little. "Yeah, said you could buy anything you wanted." I tilted my head. "What do you think about that?" He shrugged. "She doesn't know how to say she's scared, so she says you're dangerous instead." That surprised me, not because it wasn't true, but because he had seen it. I invited him in, made lemonade, sat across from him at the table where he used to color with crayons, tongue sticking out in focus. "You really have money?" he asked. "I do," I said plainly. "But money's not the real story." "What is?" "That I learned how to keep something for myself. That I trusted what I knew, even when no one else saw it." He was quiet, eyes scanning the kitchen, maybe trying to remember it the way it used to be, or maybe seeing it for the first time. "I'm glad you're here," he said finally. "I didn't know how much I missed it until I saw it again." I nodded. Sometimes the things we think we've lost are just waiting for us to notice them again. Before he left, he asked if he could come back, help fix up the shed, maybe repaint the porch. Said he wanted to learn how to do things with his hands. I said yes. Of course. Because this house, this life, was never about what I'd gained. It was about what I'd always had. The strength to stay, even when no one was watching. And now, the ones who used to overlook me were starting to see me. Not the housewife, not the quiet woman in the corner, but the builder, even now. Sometimes I wake up and expect to hear Harold's soft breathing beside me. The quiet rise and fall that once anchored my world. But the room is still, and I am alone. Not lonely, just aware. aware of all I've lived, all I've carried, all I've built, without needing permission or applause. This story, it started with silence. A woman pushed aside, a suitcase, a motel, a memory. But it ends here, in a warm kitchen, bathed in late afternoon sun, with the scent of lavender slipping through an open window and a teacup cooling slowly on the table. They thought I was just the housewife. Just the background, the afterthought. But I was the plan. I was the safety net they never saw. The scaffolding holding up their entire sense of security. I wasn't loud. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't angry. I was prepared. And I hope, if you've made it this far, you remember this. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who are underestimated. The ones who fold the laundry, pay the bills, write the checks in someone else's name, and still know exactly who they are. Being quiet doesn't mean you're invisible. Being soft doesn't mean you're weak. And being overlooked doesn't mean you're not building something powerful beneath the surface. To anyone out there who's been told they're just something, just a mother, just a wife, just a worker behind the scenes, you're not just anything. You are the architect of a story they haven't bothered to read. Let them underestimate you. Let them forget you. Let them talk over you. And when the time is right, hand them the receipts. Thank you for sitting with me tonight, for listening to this story the way it was meant to be told. Slowly, gently, like a rocking chair beside a window. If this touched you, if you felt seen, please let me know. Tell me where you're listening from, what time it is, what memory this stirred in you, and if you'd like to hear more stories like this, ones that start soft and end somewhere stronger, I'd be honored to have you back. Now, let the screen dim. Let the silence stretch. And let this story rock you into a quiet sleep, where you remember who you are and how powerful that truly is. Good night.